I remember that morning clearly, the most important meeting of my 11 years at Heli One Energy. The air inside the boardroom was thick with coffee and anticipation, an electric hum of people waiting for a verdict. I had prepared for this promotion review for months, not for the title, but because it was the next logical step after everything I had built. I sat halfway down the long oak table beside the data board I had compiled myself, numbers that proved how I had kept Helione's supply chain alive through the pandemic, the raw material crisis, and several near-collapse contracts. Each one was rescued by a plan I designed. I thought today, at the very least, would be an acknowledgement. Heli One's CEO, Mr. Marston, a man I used to respect, opened the meeting with the usual phrases about new vision and global expansion. I listened, nodded slightly, keeping my calm. When it came time for evaluations, he mentioned my name, saying Lydia have contributed greatly to the stability of Heli One. I smiled. That's how they always began when something unpleasant was coming. Across the table sat Chase Whitfield, the chairman's son. 8 months in the company, already calling himself Chief Strategy Officer. His tie was expensive, so was his smile. His voice carried that smooth arrogance of someone who knows. His power doesn't depend on competence. As soon as the CEO finished, Chase spoke, his tone polished, rehearsed. No one denies Lydia's contribution, he said, but we're entering a new era. We need bold vision, people who dare to change. Lydia is excellent at maintaining systems, but I'm not sure she's the one to lead transformation. The room went silent. I glanced around. No one reacted. The senior directors lowered their heads, pretending to take notes. No one wanted to challenge the chairman's son. The CEO sighed. We truly appreciate your dedication, Lydia, but the board has decided to bring in Dr. Lauren Hart from MIT as the new vice president of operations. She has experience with digital energy transformation projects. My throat went dry, as if I had swallowed ice. Lauren Hart. I had interviewed her months ago for a consulting role I declined to fill because she didn't understand field operations. And now, she would be my superior. Chase smiled politely and turned toward me. You know, Lydia, this isn't about ability. It's about adaptability. We need people who can run fast. I met his eyes and kept my voice steady. Sometimes running too fast makes people forget what they're running on. I built the ground so others can run without falling. He raised an eyebrow, caught off guard. Silence again. The CEO shifted topics, muttering something about appreciation and my continued importance to the operations team. I heard the words, but they felt distant, hollow. The meeting ended. People stood, shook hands, and congratulated Lauren Hart, the newcomer. I gathered my papers and left the room. Footsteps followed, heels clicking against the floor. Lauren caught up, smiling politely. I'm really looking forward to learning from you, she said. I stopped at the door and turned slightly. I hope you'll take time to understand this system before trying to change it. Then I walked away. The hallway stretched ahead, sunlight spilling across the polished floor. Each step felt heavier than the last. On the wall hung a framed photo of our first operations team. I was in the center, young, confident, believing that doing things right would always be rewarded. Now I knew better. Being right doesn't always mean winning. Outside, the Texas wind carried heat and red dust across the parking lot. I unlocked my car and sat behind the wheel, staring at the Heli One building through the windshield. 11 years. Every crisis I stayed for, every contract I salvaged, every night I didn't go home. I thought this place was mine. The engine started, its hum steady, like the last breath of an old faith. I took a deep breath, hands on the steering wheel, and told myself, all right, if they can't see the value, they'll feel the absence. Then I drove away. The building shimmered in the sunlight behind me, a cold block of glass and steel, shrinking in the rearview mirror. I didn't yet know what I would do next, only that something inside me had fallen, and something heavier had just awakened. I sat for a long time at a small cafe near Heli One. The cappuccino in front of me had gone cold, its foam collapsing long ago. Through the window, I watched employees walking in and out, their faces carrying the same practiced rush. Everything still moved, as if that meeting had never happened. 11 years, undone by a few sentences. Maybe everyone has a moment like that, when the world keeps spinning and you're the only one standing still. I smiled, not out of bitterness, but understanding. Perhaps the best thing I could do was step out of its orbit. If you're listening to this story, tell me where you're listening from. Have you ever had a moment when everything you built was dismissed with one sentence? And if you believe in stories about people who refuse to stay silent in the dark, don't forget to follow, because this is only the beginning. I went back to the company the next morning as if nothing had happened. The glass doors slid open, the air smelled of cold metal, and the white hallway lights hit my eyes. I walked past the reception desk, hearing my own footsteps echo evenly across the floor. No one greeted me. A few glances, quick, then gone. News traveled faster than I thought. The weekly operations meeting started at 8 in the morning sharp. I stood there presenting, speaking clearly as always, my voice steady, even though my mind was blank. People listened, nodded, and took notes. Chase wasn't on the guest list, but halfway through, the door opened and he walked in with two members of his new strategy team. No one dared to breathe too loudly. He leaned against the table, his voice slicing through my presentation mid-sentence. "So you're still talking about optimizing the old supply chain?" He smiled faintly, glancing at the young analyst behind him. "I don't understand why we keep those outdated models. They weigh the company down, like carrying a useless boulder." The air froze. I looked straight at him, not flinching. I heard the faint sound of a pen dropping, someone clearing their throat. "If that's what you think," I said slowly, "then maybe a little weight is what keeps the ground from collapsing." He gave a light laugh, said only, "Interesting," and left the room with his team. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. I closed my laptop, stopped the presentation halfway, and told the team, "Continue without me." Then I walked out and went straight to my office. No one spoke to me for the rest of the morning. Around noon, an email from Human Resources arrived. "Lydia, please come to HR at 3 in the afternoon. We need to discuss structural adjustments." I knew exactly what that meant. The HR department sat on the 10th floor, the far corner of the building, the place where every goodbye happened. When I walked in, a young HR officer gave me an awkward smile. A thick folder already lay on the table. Chase was there, one leg crossed over the other, holding a half-empty coffee cup. "Lydia," he said, his tone as if he were greeting a guest. "We appreciate your contributions, but as you know, the company is restructuring. We need to be leaner, faster. This isn't a personal decision." I looked down at the folder. A thick document, already signed by the CEO. Voluntary separation package, it read. 6 months' pay, full benefits intact. They wanted me gone quietly. "I'm not surprised," I said, sliding the folder back toward him. "You work fast." Chase leaned back, smiling thinly. "This is how people leave with dignity. You deserve that." I stayed silent, picked up the pen, and signed my name. It took less than 3 minutes. He extended his hand. I shook it, feeling the cold, slick grip of someone trained to end every deal with a smile. When I stepped out, the afternoon sun hit the long hallway. A few coworkers avoided my eyes. Others pretended to be on the phone. I kept walking. At the elevator, Lauren Hart stepped out. She looked startled, then forced a polite smile. "I was just assigned your old office," she said. "If there's any documentation I should review, I'd really appreciate your guidance." I nodded once. "Everything's already in the system. Just find the right folder. It'll lead you to what you need. Good luck." I left the building feeling strangely light, not because I was at peace, but because the anger had burned out, leaving only emptiness. That evening, I sat in the living room, warm light falling over the wooden table. My phone buzzed. A message from my husband appeared on the screen. I heard the news. "I know you did your best. I'll open a bottle of wine. Whether it's for celebration or for forgetting, I'll be sitting beside you." I stared at the message for a while, then set the phone down, opened my laptop, and logged into my company account to download my remaining personal files. While checking an old folder, I noticed a strange email sent to my internal inbox 3 days earlier. "North Ray Pipeline, confidential, PDF." I didn't remember ever receiving it. The sender's name was clear: Chase Whitfield, Helione Energy. An internal email from his account. No subject line, just a single attachment named North Ray Pipeline / Confidential. PDF. I opened it. Inside was a contract allocation chart, a list of new partners, and a few short notes, written bluntly, without pretense. Transfer all government contracts to North Ray. Ensure board approval before the third quarter. I read it again, slower this time. Each word dropped like a stone. North Ray. The name appeared several times, bolded, as if to make sure no one could miss it. I had never heard of this company in any meeting. And more importantly, there was no reason a file like this should have been sent to me, the so-called burden they had just dismissed. I stared at the screen, the email still open, blue light reflecting on my face. The document was clearly not sent by mistake. Chase was careful. He never leaked anything unless there was a reason. For a moment, I thought someone wanted me to see it, then I pushed the idea away. The only thing I knew for certain was that something was very wrong. I saved the file to my personal drive, disconnected the Wi-Fi, and opened each page again. The line transferring all government contracts to Northray appeared repeatedly in multiple sections, accompanied by mismatched numbers. A huge consulting fee was listed with no named payee. In the approvals section was Chase's digital signature. Northray. I ran a quick search. A new energy company, founded a little over a year ago, based in Houston, with no clear about page, only a few vague lines. Digging into public business filings revealed the investment fund behind it, Whitfield Strategic Holdings. I sat still for a long moment. Whitfield. Chase's surname. The chairman's surname. No further facts needed. The picture was clear enough. Chase was building a shell company to move government contracts offshore, profiting while masking cash flows. If the plan passed, Helly One would be an empty shell, and the Whitfield family would take control. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. Anger had gone. What remained was a cold clarity. I could take this to the authorities. I could send it straight to the CEO. But I knew how this company cleaned up problems. They would blame an accidental leak, and Chase would keep rising. I shut the laptop, stood, and paced the living room. The apartment was quiet except for the steady tick of the wall clock. In the mirror, I saw myself, hair messy, eyes tired, but my gaze sharp. I wondered if I vanished now, would anyone notice, or would they feel relieved that a burden had been lifted? I opened my phone and scrolled through my contacts. One name stopped me mid-list. Eli Sanderson, founder of Phoenix Grid, a small startup I advised 3 years earlier. The last time we spoke, the Phoenix Grid was nearly bankrupt, short of capital to keep its battery production line alive. I had told him that sometimes small things only need the right opportunity. I stared at his name but did not call. Not yet. I needed to understand more before I acted. I sat back down, opened the document, photographed each page with my phone, and saved the images to an external drive. Then I made a copy, renamed it, and hid it inside an old photo folder among hundreds of travel pictures from last year. I deleted the email from my inbox, removed the original file from my computer, and powered down the machine. I opened the window, letting in the sounds of traffic and the familiar smell of Austin exhaust and dust. I lit a candle and watched the small flame cast a wavering light on the wall. Something inside me was changing, not loudly or violently, but slowly, deliberately, and irreversibly. That night, I wrote one line in a letter to myself: "Don't tell anyone until they realize what they have lost." I folded the note and slipped it into an old notebook. At that moment, I knew I would not return to Helly One. Not to apologize, not to explain. I did not belong there anymore. The next morning, I called the Information Technology Department and asked them to terminate my internal account early to avoid security risks. They agreed without asking why. I closed the laptop, put the external drive in a drawer, and looked around the room. Everything looked the same, but in my head, a plan had begun to take shape. Not a plan of revenge, but a blueprint for something larger, cleaner, and strong enough to make them stop. I was no longer the person who had been fired. I was the one who had just stepped away from the wreckage, carrying the blueprints for the foundation they were about to collapse. I left Austin a few days later. No one knew, not even my closest friends from the old company. I told my husband I needed time to think. He just nodded, didn't ask a single question. We understood each other too well, and he knew there were things I had to face on my own. I drove south to Houston. The city always gave me a strange feeling, chaotic, loud, but also alive in a way that made even the smallest idea feel like it could explode into something world-changing. I met Eli Sanderson at a cafe near the tech district, the same place where, years ago, he once told me, if you have enough energy, even a pile of scrap metal can become a factory. He arrived on time, looking thinner than before, his eyes still carrying the stubborn light of someone who doesn't know how to quit. When he saw me, he smiled, half surprised, half cautious. "Lydia Chen," he said, "I thought you'd forgotten about small people like us." "I haven't," I said, sitting down across from him. "I just remembered that the small people are the only ones who actually build something real." We talked for over an hour. He told me Phoenix Grid was struggling badly, a major order canceled, cash flow drying up, and engineers leaving. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I reached into my bag, pulled out the external drive, and slid it across the table. "I have something," I said. "A full plan to divert hundreds of millions in government contracts to a shell company. I want you to see it." Eli frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about One," I said calmly. "They're digging their own grave, and I have the evidence to prove it. But I'm not here to expose them. I want to build something better, cleaner, and strong enough to replace them." He stared at me for a long time, then let out a short laugh, not quite believing. "You sound like a movie. But if what you're saying is real, what do you expect to do?" "I don't have funding or infrastructure. I have funding. I have experience. And you have the technology. Together we can create an energy storage solution they can't replicate." I paused, meeting his eyes. "I'm not after revenge. I just want them to see what they underestimated." Eli leaned back, tapping his fingers on the table. He looked torn. "You know, Lydia," he said slowly, "listening to you makes me want to believe. And run at the same time. People like you, when you've been hurt, you usually want to burn the world down." "I'm not burning anything," I said softly. "I just want to light it up." He studied me for a few more seconds, then nodded. "All right, but if we do this, we do it right. No tricks, no shortcuts. I don't want to build another dirty empire. Neither do I said, reaching out my hand. He shook it, firm and certain. We spent the next 2 weeks working out of a small, rented office on the outskirts of Houston. 3 desks, 4 chairs, 2 old computers, and a whiteboard covered in sketches. I worked like someone who had never been broken. With one thought only, this was my second chance. Phoenix Grid started from almost nothing. We recycled what was left from old projects, worked through the night refining the battery model Eli had abandoned years ago. When the first prototype came to life, he stood there watching the panel flicker on, his voice rough with disbelief. "My God, it's running." I just nodded, watching the steady light blink across the board. In that light, I saw a reflection of who I used to be, 11 years ago, still believing that if I did everything right, the world would be fair. Now I knew better. Fairness doesn't exist on its own. People have to build it. Eli insisted that I be listed as co-founder. I refused at first, but he said, "You'll need authority to protect this company, Lydia. I need someone who can talk to the government, to investors. I can't do that." I looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "Fine, but we don't become them. If I ever see this company heading down the same road, I'll be the first to pull the plug." He smiled. "Fair enough." 3 months later, Phoenix Grid submitted its clean energy storage prototype to the Department of Energy. The project was approved faster than we expected, partly because One had just paused its own contracts for internal restructuring. I knew I'd been right. Their system was cracking. I never tried to contact Chase again. He probably thought I had vanished, accepted defeat. I liked it that way. Because when he eventually saw the name Phoenix Grid appear on the government's new partnership list, I wanted him to wonder who was behind it. The night before signing the pilot contract, I stood on the rooftop of our building, watching the lights of Houston stretch toward the horizon. I thought about One, about those polished boardrooms, about Chase's cold, practiced smile. and I whispered to myself, a quiet vow under the city's glow. They thought I was a burden. Soon they'll understand. Some things, once lost, can never be rebuilt. When Phoenix Grid signed its first pilot contract, there were only 3 full-time people on the team. None of us thought we were starting a war. We simply wanted to prove that clean energy storage could run more reliably, more efficiently, and with more transparency. But the world does not run on good intentions. It runs on power. And at Heli One, Chase Whitfield held all of that power. News about Phoenix Grid spread fast. A small company led by a handful of engineers and a former director who had been dismissed was granted a pilot by the Department of Energy in the same region Heli One once dominated. Former colleagues began sending messages, at first congratulations, then warnings, careful at first, and then blunt. Be careful, Chase is asking about you. I did not reply. I knew Chase would not sit still. And I was right. One morning, as I was reviewing lab validation results, Eli came in and threw a newspaper on the table. The front page ran a headline accusing a former Heli One employee of stealing proprietary technology and illegally founding a competing company. Under it was my face, pulled from an old interview. They did not name Chase, but the story made it obvious who the antagonist was. I stared at the paper and said nothing. Eli was furious. My God, he said, they are trying to destroy you. They will pull the whole company down with you. I know, I answered, my voice calmer than I felt. But stay calm. This is how they play. 3 days later, we lost an investor. A week later, 2 engineers quit, worried about legal exposure. Anonymous emails started showing up. Some threats, some mockery. Online articles labeled Phoenix Gry, the company of a traitor. I had prepared for them, not sparing me, but I did not expect them to go this far. The government opened an inquiry into alleged intellectual property theft. I was summoned to Washington to testify. I knew the hearing was a trap, but if I refused, Phoenix Grid would be shut down immediately. There was no choice. The hearing room was cold and glaring. A panel of officials sat across from me with thick stacks of documents, photos, and comparative charts between Heli One Technology and Phoenix Grid. One man asked, Ms. Chen, can you confirm you did not use any internal Heli One data to develop Phoenix Grid technology? I can, I replied. I did not need it. I built this system from public data that the government released years ago. The only thing I brought from Heli One was expertise that had been dismissed. The man looked up, surprised. You claim Heli One is diverting contracts, he asked. Do you have proof? I looked him in the eye. If I had proof, I would have filed it, I said. But that does not change that they are distracting the public to hide something else. He fell silent. The hearing lasted nearly 3 hours. When I stepped out, Eli waited in the hallway, anxious. How did it go? He asked. They found nothing, I said, but they are not convinced yet. We returned to Houston in silence. I knew Chase would not stop. For him, this was more than business. It was about honor. He needed to prove that firing me was the right move, and the only way he knew how was to destroy me. That night, I received an untitled email with one line. They are watching you. Attached was a blurry photo of a man in a suit standing outside Phoenix Grid headquarters, looking at the glass doors. I did not know who sent it. I did not know the man in the photo. Eli wanted to call the police. I told him not to. We have nothing to hide, I said. If they want to look, let them look. They will find nothing left to take. The next morning, we worked as usual. I told no one, but in my head, I began to assemble the threads, the articles, the inquiry, even the hearing, all arranged to exhaust me, to make me slip. Chase was playing psychological warfare, but that game would backfire if I had patience. 2 weeks later, a USB arrived in an envelope at the office. No sender, no note. Eli assumed spam. I did not. I plugged it into the meeting room computer and found 3 files. All were internal Heli One emails. One was titled Regarding Payments to Northray's Priority Confidentiality. Opening it revealed a ledger of disbursements with multiple signatures, including a familiar name, Chase Whitfield. I sat motionless for a few seconds. Eli leaned over and asked, "Did you just find something?" "This is more than evidence," I said, my voice low. "This is the weak point." Chase had just handed me the final piece of the puzzle. The USB in my hand was small enough to look harmless, yet it held something powerful enough to sink an entire corporation. I opened the file. The subject line appeared on screen. Regarding payments to Northray, confidentiality priority. The document listed enormous transfers bearing the digital signature of Chase Whitfield. Below were vague notes. Do not disclose, await board approval before the third quarter. By the last line, I knew without doubt. Northray was a shell company, a pipeline for Chase to funnel government contract money out of Heli One. And if I stayed silent, I would become part of that crime. I called Eliza Hart, a corporate attorney I'd heard about, famous for never fearing anyone. After hearing me out, she said only one sentence. "You send nothing, you tell no one. I'll be in Houston in the morning." When she arrived, she didn't waste a minute. Eliza plugged the USB into her private laptop, reviewed everything, and then looked up. "Do you know what you're holding?" she asked. "This is money laundering, Lydia. If I'm right, Heli One is committing a federal crime." I nodded. "I know. And I'm not going to let it stay buried." She closed her laptop, her tone sharp and steady. "All right. We'll send this straight to the Department of Energy. No media, no leaks. We'll file a formal whistleblower submission. Once it's sent, there's no turning back. I don't need to turn back." 3 days later, the rechart and all related data were submitted through the secure portal of the Department of Energy's Office of Inspector General, with a copy to the SEC. We signed under the name Voluntary Information Provider. 2 days after that, I got a call. "Mrs. Chen, this is Agent Marcus Hall, Department of Energy. We'd like to meet with you." The meeting took place in a small conference room at the federal building. They reviewed every piece of evidence, recorded my testimony. I told them everything, from the emails and the transfers to my dismissal. They made no promises, only said, "If it checks out, there will be a seizure order." A week later, everything exploded. That morning, CNN's headline glowed in red. "Department of Energy launches investigation into Heli One Energy." By afternoon, warrants were issued. Federal agents walked through Heli One's headquarters carrying boxes, hard drives, and lists of evidence to seize. 2 days later came the official statement. All Heli One Energy contracts valued at $200 million are temporarily suspended pending investigation. I watched the report on screen. There was no triumph in me, just quiet, the kind that comes when something long overdue finally ends. Eliza called right after. "The press is running it. Your name isn't in the public record. Stay silent. I'm not planning to say anything." At Heli One, chaos erupted. I heard through old colleagues that Chase was under questioning. The CEO, his father, had called an emergency board meeting. Half the finance team was suspended. Investors were pulling out. Shares plummeted. Then Chase fought back. He released a short interview implying that a disgruntled former employee had provided false information. It was meant to save his reputation, but it only made people more curious. Eliza laughed when she saw it. When powerful men start explaining, it means they're afraid. A week later, the Department of Energy released its preliminary findings. The money flow between Heli One and Northray showed irregularities. The SEC opened a parallel investigation into insider trading. The story was everywhere. Chase was suspended. His father, Robert Whitfield, appeared at a brief press conference, voice calm but face pale. "Heli One will fully cooperate with federal authorities," he said, but his expression said it all. He knew the game was over. That evening, I stood across the street from Heli One's tower, the lights still blazing like a sinking ship refusing to go dark. I remembered the day they called me dead weight, the smirk on Chase's face, the silence of that boardroom where I had once believed I mattered. Now, they were the ones who had to stay silent. I wasn't happy. I was simply at peace. When I got home, Eliza called again, her voice low but steady. "They've officially frozen $200 million in Heli One accounts. And Lydia, this time you didn't just save yourself, you brought the light back where it belongs." "No," I said quietly. "I just opened a door." The light came in on its own. I ended the call and stepped out onto the balcony. The Texas night wind brushed past, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic. Inside me, there was no anger, no bitterness, only one truth, sharp and simple. They called me a burden. But that burden was the only thing holding the whole system together until they tore it apart themselves. For 3 weeks after the Department of Energy froze Heli One's contracts, the news was everywhere. Every morning, when I turned on the TV or stepped into a cafe, the same names echoed around me: Heli One, Whitfield, North Ray. People talked about it like it was a TV drama, not the real collapse of a company that had put thousands out of work. Phoenix Grid, meanwhile, was the opposite: small, quiet, and suddenly in the spotlight. The government's suspension of Heli One's projects redirected part of the testing budget toward us. A new invitation to bid arrived, and I knew exactly what it was: the moment I had been waiting for. I told Eli, "We're entering. Not just to win, but to prove that you don't have to cheat to succeed." He looked at me, half worried, half proud. "Are you sure you want to step into the light now? You're still tied to a federal investigation." "I'm done hiding," I said. "You can only reclaim your dignity by doing what's right in plain sight." We submitted our proposal. 2 weeks later, I was invited to Washington to present Phoenix Grid's technology. Everything went smoothly until I stepped out of the conference room and saw Chase waiting in the hallway. He stood leaning against the wall in a gray suit, thinner than before, his eyes still hard as steel. "I knew you'd be here," he said calmly, too calmly. "I guess the FBI shared their schedule with you," I replied. He smirked. "You're clever, Lydia, but you don't understand. You're not going to win. You're just attracting attention to yourself. I know how to make people forget." "You mean you can buy justice?" I asked. "No," he said, lowering his voice close to my ear. "I just know how to hire the ones who write it. But you can stop this. I can make everything disappear. You withdraw your name, stay quiet, and I'll make sure Phoenix Grid gets funding as a partner project. No investigation, no headlines, no trouble." I gave a quiet laugh. "You just offered to bribe a federal witness, Chase. You might want to be more careful who you bargain with." He froze for half a second. Then the smirk returned, but it wasn't as steady. "You don't get it, Lydia. You can't win against a system you don't control." "Maybe not," I said, "but I can make it look at itself." I walked away, leaving him standing there, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't arrogance. It was fear. A few days later, Heli One held a press conference. Robert Whitfield sat at the center, his face tense, a legal advisor beside him. Chase sat behind him, head lowered. The newscaster's voice filled my living room. "Heli One confirms full cooperation with federal authorities and plans a strategic restructuring to regain investor confidence." I said nothing. It was the language of a company trying to paper over its own ruins. Then something I hadn't expected happened. The next day, Phoenix Grid received an email from Katrina Whitfield, Robert's ex-wife and Heli One's former co-founder. She disappeared from the industry years ago after their divorce. The email was brief. "I know who you are, and I know Chase. I have information you'll want. Meet me at the Belmore Hotel, 7 tomorrow evening." Eli didn't like it. "Sounds like a trap," he said. "Maybe," I replied. "But if she has what I need, I can't ignore it." Katrina Whitfield looked nothing like the magazine photos I remembered. She was no longer the sharp, glamorous figure with the proud smile. She was a woman who had fought too many battles, tired, but still carrying that quiet dignity of someone who refused to break. When I arrived, she was already seated, a glass of red wine in hand. "You have eyes like mine when I was young," she said before I could speak. "Always looking straight ahead, but ready to run if you have to." I sat down. "What do you want from me?" She laughed softly. "Direct. I like that. I want to help you end this. Not for you, but for my foolish son." I stayed silent. She pulled a small envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. "This is a copy of the agreement between Chase and Northray's CFO. He's planning to cut his father out entirely, to sell the entire supply chain network to a Cayman fund. If it goes through, Robert loses everything. And you, the woman who built that foundation, will be erased from history." I opened the envelope. Inside were emails, signatures, preliminary contracts, and a voice recording of Chase speaking with a British-sounding man about transferring hidden shares. What do you want me to do with this? I asked. Bring it to light, she said. But remember, when you do, you're helping me clean up my own blood. You want me to get my hands dirty for you. No, Katrina replied. I want you to hold the knife properly. Her gaze lingered on me for a long moment, measuring. Then she stood, adjusting her coat. You have 3 days before the Heli One board votes on restructuring. After that, it'll all be buried forever. What are you going to do? I asked without thinking. She turned back, gave a tired smile. I just want to see what my son learns when everything he wants collapses. That night, I sat alone in the office. The papers Katrina had given me lay spread out across the desk. Eli had gone home. Only the steady hum of the fan filled the room. I stared at the documents, then at my reflection in the glass. Exhausted face, steady eyes. I could send everything to Eliza and let the law take over, but I knew Chase. He would twist it, blame someone else, spin a new version of the truth that worked for him. I needed a hit that would leave him no room to recover. I opened my laptop and began to write. Not a legal report, but a financial analysis. An independent Phoenix Grid study on the relationship between Helione and Northray in the clean energy supply chain. I embedded everything. Data from the USB, Katrina's documents, public records, enough for everyone in the industry to understand exactly who I was talking about without naming a single name. The next morning, the report appeared on the front page of Energy Journal, the largest publication in clean energy. Within hours, it spread. Investors read it. Lawmakers read it. The Department of Energy read it. By noon, the hashtag HeliOneFraud was trending across social media. And for the first time since the day they called me deadweight, I felt the weight of myself again. Not as a burden, but as the force that made the entire system finally tremble. The report spread faster than any media campaign I had ever seen. Within 48 hours, it was everywhere, shared across financial forums, quoted on morning business shows, even sitting on the desks of Congressional Energy Committee members. No one needed me to spell out the name Heli One. The numbers, the models, and the chain of contracts told the story on their own. That night, I was still in the office when Eliza called. Lydia, you just set off an earthquake. Heli One will not survive this without a sacrifice. I am guessing Chase, I said. Maybe. But be ready. When people are about to lose everything, they come for whoever started the fall. She was right. The next morning, a black sedan stopped in front of Phoenix Grid's office. A middle-aged man stepped out, suit pressed so sharply it looked like armor. I am David Lang, he said. I represent the Heli One board. Mr. Whitfield would like to meet you. Where? I asked. Your old headquarters. He says it will take 30 minutes. Eli watched me stand and reach for my coat. You are not really going, are you? I am, I said. Not for him, for me. The 17th floor conference room looked exactly the same. Bright, spotless, cold. Robert Whitfield sat at the head of the table, his face older than I remembered. Chase was to his right, silent, his hands locked together. The confidence was gone, replaced by exhaustion and bitterness. Robert began in a rough voice. Thank you for coming, Lydia. I know things have gone too far. I think we define too far differently, I said. He sighed and nodded slowly. You have every right to be angry, but you know I never meant to harm you. Chase acted impulsively. I glanced at Chase. He avoided my eyes, jaw tight. Impulsive was a word too kind for what he had done. Robert continued. Regardless, Heli One remains a vital institution with thousands of employees. We need to stabilize. And frankly, Phoenix Grid's rise is unsettling investors. I would like to propose another path. I folded my arms. I am listening. We would like to acquire Phoenix Grid, partly to integrate your technology, partly to restore Heli One's image. You would retain full technical authority, serve as branch CEO, and, of course, receive appropriate compensation. You can set your own conditions. I smiled faintly. So you want me to rebuild the thing you destroyed? Robert did not flinch, just looked tired. In business, Lydia, there is no absolute right or wrong. Sometimes, to save people, you accept the blood loss. That blood is not yours, I said. It is from the people you fired, the ones you called burdens. The air went heavy. Chase lifted his head at last. Stop moralizing. Everyone just wants to win. No, Chase, I said. Some people just want respect. He gave a thin smile. You know, if you had not sent that USB, if you had just stayed quiet for a few more weeks, I could have saved everything. You would not have had to play the hero. I looked at him for a long time. I did not save anyone. I just stopped. Before becoming like you. Enough, Robert said sharply. Chase, leave. He stood, the chair scraping against the floor. Before walking out, he gave me a look I will never forget, a mixture of hatred and despair. When the door closed, Robert leaned on the table, voice low. I will not apologize for my son. But I will ask one thing. Do not let Heli One collapse completely. Your project could save thousands of jobs. Let us invest. You do not have to sell, just collaborate. Lydia, you have already won. Let me lose with some dignity. I stayed silent for a long moment. I understood his words were not just negotiation. They were the plea of a man watching his empire fall apart. But I also knew that if I said yes, everything I had fought for would lose its meaning. I stood. You are right. Heli One was once my home, but now it is a monument. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a monument is let it fall instead of rebuilding it on broken ground. Robert's eyes glistened. You will never know how strong you are, Lydia. I am not stronger than anyone, I said. I just stopped bowing. I walked out of that room for the second time and knew it would be the last. 2 weeks later, the investigation closed. The Department of Energy fined Heli One $48 million for bid rigging and unlawful transfers. Chase Whitfield was indicted for financial fraud. Robert Whitfield resigned. Heli One's stock lost 60% of its value, and Phoenix Grid was selected as one of the new partners in the National Clean Energy Program. Eliza sent me the news summary with a single line. Game over. I smiled. Not quite. This was never a game. Eli came in with 2 coffees. Good news, he said. We just landed 2 more contracts, and the government wants to fund the next phase. I took the cup and nodded. That is not good news. It is just the right beginning. I turned toward the window. Outside, the morning light washed over the skyline, a new Houston rising, like my own life rebuilding itself. No anger left, no fear. Just work to be done. People will rewrite this story their way, the woman who was fired and got revenge. But that is not the truth. I did not avenge anything. I just reclaimed what should never have been taken, respect and the belief that one person can change what everyone else calls impossible. That night, I opened my old notebook and looked at the line I had written on the day I was dismissed. Do not tell anyone until they realize what they have lost. Then I added a new one beneath it, and when they do, build again so they will never be able to destroy it twice. I have always believed that the ending of a story is not the moment everything falls silent, but the echo that lingers the longest. A year has passed since that small USB landed on our conference table. And I have learned one truth. Resilience is not noise. It is the steady rhythm that makes everything else fade. Phoenix Grid is no longer a fragile startup. What began with 3 people sharing an old desk has grown into a team of more than 60. We signed a series of government test contracts, received funding for a regional energy storage project, and opened a battery assembly plant on the outskirts of Austin. Eli's technology stabilized, the operations team matured, and everything moved forward without the shadows of deception. I avoid headlines that shout about revenge, heroism, or the fall of the Whitfields. Stories always shrink when packaged into neat summaries. Instead, I spend my early weeks of the year working with the engineering team, sitting with warehouse operators, reviewing safety protocols, and even fixing code myself. Real work keeps me grounded. I like that. One late autumn morning, I received an invitation from the Congressional Energy Committee. They wanted me to testify about ethics and transparency in energy innovation, a topic that made me both laugh and feel heavy. I knew I would face microphones, cameras, and expectations for easy answers, but I accepted because some things need to be said. The hearing room was cold and bright. I stood at the podium, facing a row of lawmakers, advisors, and reporters. I had no polished speech, only 11 years of experience, a string of emails, and a truth carefully assembled. When the microphone turned on, I began, calm and clear. I am not here to tell a revenge story. I am here because I watched a system being exploited. Oh, we are calling for a new standard, transparency in bidding, accountability in contracting, and protection of employees as more than heritage, as a survival skill. When workers are called dead weight, it is not a technical remark. It is a threat to the entire ecosystem. I gave examples describing how contracts were misallocated, how consulting fees appeared without justification, and how oversight was buried. I spoke about Phoenix Grid, not to boast, but to prove there is a way out when people choose openness and process over manipulation. My answers did not please everyone, but they made one thing clear: transparency is the most powerful form of innovation. After the hearing, many came to shake my hand. One senator said, "You changed the way we see the issue." A journalist asked about my personal motivation, and I replied simply, "I do this because I do not want my child to grow up in a system that can be bought by silence." It was not eloquent, but it was true. When I left the Capitol, I walked aimlessly through the crowd, wondering if my actions had truly changed anything or just stirred the air. The answer came slowly, in emails from former colleagues, in quiet thanks from engineers I once mentored, in calls from government partners who genuinely wanted to reform. A month later, Phoenix Grid received official notice. We had been chosen as the primary contractor for the Regional Clean Energy Storage Program, a substantial project. When the news spread, my team cheered, not for profit, but for proof that integrity could still win. I stood off to the side, watching, feeling a quiet warmth spread through me, not the thrill of victory, but the peace of restored faith. Still, there were days when I was haunted by that conference room and the word dead weight. It no longer hurt, but it reminded me of those who were dismissed. So when a young engineer named Miguel came into my office one afternoon, eyes red from lack of sleep, I saw a different kind of life, the one I wanted to protect. Miguel had worked at one of Heli One's pilot plants before the layoffs. He had basic training in energy storage, but never got a chance to prove himself. He sat nervously, unsure if he belonged. He told me about his last day at Heli One when his manager called him slow, and not long after, he was let go. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I said, "You worked there. You know the system. Here, we need people like you. Those who understand how the machine works from the inside, not just from slides. If you want, I will introduce you to the head of engineering." He looked at me as if I had handed him a second life. "I am ready to learn," he said. "I do not want to live in fear anymore." I smiled, remembering myself a year earlier, the silent one, carrying her pain like a secret. "All right," I said, "but remember one thing. Here, we do not call anyone dead weight. We call each other foundation." In the weeks that followed, Miguel became part of the team. I watched him tighten bolts, fix code, and understand the bigger picture. And for the first time, I felt something different. I no longer wanted to prove Chase wrong. I wanted people like Miguel to work without fear, without shame. My story never became legend. I did not want it to. There are still sleepless nights, thinking of those who lost their jobs, those who never found their footing again. But I have come to understand that change is small. It lives in a job preserved, a process corrected, a transparent contract. Those things add up, and that is what makes a difference. One morning, while preparing a weekly report for the plant, I saw a short piece on Robert Whitfield. He had sold most of his shares, left the board, and started a nonprofit fund for energy research. His life, like everyone's, would be rewritten the way people chose to remember it. I felt neither joy nor sorrow. It was no longer my story to carry. I opened my notebook and found the old line: "Do not tell anyone until they realize what they have lost." I smiled and wrote a new one beneath it, a note for myself and anyone who might hear this story someday. "Do not let anyone call you a burden. Be the foundation. Quiet when needed, loud when it matters, and build so that no one can ever destroy it again." I closed the notebook and stepped out onto the factory floor. The sounds of machines, footsteps, and steady voices blended like music finding its rhythm. In that space, among panels and steel frames, I found peace. not because I had defeated anyone, but because, with a team beside me, I had built something that truly mattered. And as the sun set over the river in Austin, the last light touched the surface of a newly mounted solar panel, glinting like a promise. If anyone ever called me dead weight again when that light came on, they would see that I was the foundation they once thought they could discard.